Hello, and welcome to the Hammer and Vajra podcast. This is going to be a new style of episode. Hopefully, I'll have more where we will be doing interviews and discussions between those of pagan faith, dharmic faiths, or general spirituality that is not the Abrahamic norm. Uh, Today, I have a guest. My guest is Sagnamadr Stark, or Malcolm. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, you may know me as Sagnamadr Stark, or some of my older pen names like Arngrim Ingvarsson. I had not yet come up with this one yet. And I am a practicing Germanic pagan, have been for coming up a decade now. And a few years ago, I started just kind of sharing sort of my notes on just my own research into the Germanic pagan faith through literature, archaeology, and even just folklore in Germany and Scandinavia. And several years later, I've kind of turned it into a whole thing. And I've been diversifying my online presence with Telegram, Twitter. I was unceremoniously booted from Facebook, just like our friend Tom. But for now, you can find me on Twitter, Telegram, and Gab. And I've got a few kind of projects in the works, which you'll probably be seeing in the future. But so basically, unlike a lot of people, I know a lot of pagans these days are ex-Christians, but I was always just really into history. Like started when I spawned when I was a child, and just through my research, eventually into my own heritage, my own history, you might say everything just kind of clicked.
I think that's kind of what happened for a lot of us, in a similar thing, but, probably not the same way, where I
Yeah.
started to kind of reverse research and things clicked for me as well. Um, the one thing I was going to say is that I will be linking your social media and a few things in
Thanks.
either the YouTube or the Telegram, wherever else that I end up posting this episode to. So that way I'll be doing this for all the other people who come for interviews as well. That way we're spreading awareness and channels. I don't like to compare numbers of who has following. If you have great content and you got twice the amount of following as I have out of nowhere, and that content's great, then I am 100% about supporting you and that content. That's why even though Survive the Jive has double or triple the numbers I have, I'm still sharing his stuff because of the quality of the content. Um,
Agreed.
so one thing I think that you had mentioned with the historic aspect of your focus, which is you're one of the ones I would suggest, especially when people are talking about Reconstructionism. I think I even mentioned you in one of my videos, and is that you do have quite a bit of hands-on with some artifacts, as it were. And I thought
Yes.
maybe you would like to introduce sort of the situation with artifacts, your call to artifacts, maybe how you're able to do what you do with artifacts, your plan for the future of artifacts,
Okay.
and just your favorites as well.
Yeah. So a lot of the artifacts you've seen on my channel, well, the ones that are in my hand, obviously, I do personally own. And I do get asked a lot of questions about them. Like, well, big one is, are you involved in illegal smuggling? And the short answer is no. But the government in the UK is a lot more lenient with these things. I suppose the British museums just become so inundated that what they do is they want you to report it so that they can make a digital record. But if it's not a certain percentage of precious metal or it's not particularly unique, they'll ultimately give it back to the seller who can do whatever they want with it. Like there's a lot of things you've seen on my channel that are gilded, just got a thin coating of gold, but it doesn't quite hit 10%, so it doesn't qualify as treasure, so it's ultimately returned. And Russia has a similar system, but for obvious reasons, I'm really not able to get things from Russia right now. But a lot of these laws came into effect in the 50s about treasure and things like that. So I do have two things from Scandinavia, one thing from Sweden and one thing from Denmark. And like today, Denmark has very strict laws about these things. But because this was in a family collection before the law came into effect, it was able to be sold legally. And it's not like something super unique. It's a little bronze brooch. But today, you can't get anything from Scandinavia or Ireland, is another big one, like without getting some serious legal trouble. And I started collecting, and don't get me wrong, I love seeing and holding these things, but I got started collecting when I heard about just the rampant incompetence going on in Europe. Well, first of all, with Sweden, you've probably heard the Swedish History Museum
Yeah.
was melting down things that weren't unique enough, and that filled my heart with a berserker's rage.
Yeah, I raged on for a few days with that too.
Yeah. But here's the thing. I actually contacted someone who used to work at the Swedish History Museum and knew someone inside, and he got me some more info, and he got back and said, "We only melt down masses of rust." And I sent him a report from Lincolnshire of an excavation of an Anglo-Saxon village in which they pulled several things out of masses of rust, like entire brooches, glass beads, cosmetic tools, things like that. And I even pointed him to a few things like that little dragon head from Birka, Sweden, which were found in masses of rust. So Sweden obviously is doing the worst job of all of them. But the UK actually in 2015 proposed a similar policy of just to clear dig sites for development faster, just throw any masses of rust into the crucible. But it got shot down hard because people in the UK actually care about these things.
Well, some
And
people.
then you also have Norway, where Norway currently has this policy where if an artifact is found on your property, the government can choose to step in and seize your property, which means a lot of people don't come forward when they find things. There was a case recently where a farmer found some petroglyphs on his farm when he was just moving some moss and rock around. And because he was afraid of losing his farm, he took a sledgehammer and smashed it into rubble.
Oh
And
man,
I hope this man goes to jail for the rest of his life, but government's hands aren't clean here either.
of course.
And it is also true with like Russia and Eastern Europe. A lot of these artifacts, like things from Kiev and Rus, for example, hit the market like in like the days of the Soviet Union when people were just piss poor and
That's true. That's true.
selling whatever they could find. So there's a bit of like a legal gray area around that, and Ukraine currently is trying to button in, well, as best as they can, given current circumstances, like a new system. And all right, I do have one thing that might be kind of shady. It's a Roman brooch, which was found in the Sava River in, it was Croatia. Like, oh, it's from this family collection, but it's like there's a very good chance that this was metal detected by like a rebel during one of the many like civil wars, like the Yugoslav war, and just sold to buy a few extra boxes of ammo. But for the most part, I'm able to get these things legally, and I record them. I'm trying to like get the pictures and records out to anyone who wants to see them. And currently, like it is also true that some things in like even the Swedish History Museum aren't displayed regularly. Like they're in the like archives and in the back rooms, and they don't see the light of day very often. But I am well also preserving them, just trying to bring them to as many people as I can. And I would love it if I could have like a physical museum or gallery someday. Or one friend
That
of
would be
mine
really.
who
Yeah, that would
also
be really cool.
collects artifacts, I've actually bought several things from him, was talking about he went around to a few like conventions and had this display table that he set up. He even let people handle a few things.
Ooh.
And as far as that goes, as far as like preservation goes, um, I do have all the tools. If I do have something that needs conservation work done, yeah, like for the most part, if you get, for example, something that's bronze, like ideally anything bronze or copper alloy is going to have an even patina, and you're not going to have to do anything. But it can condition develop this condition called bronze disease, where if it was in like a really acidic environment, it develops like a malignant form of verdigris, where it's like it's fuzzy, kind of bluish, and it's actively eating the metal. But there's a few chemical treatments you can use to neutralize it because, well, in layman's terms, what's going on is an acidic reaction and you just need to neutralize it. Like for minor cases, what you do is you scrape off the chlorides and you just immerse it in distilled water and switch the distilled water every 2 days for 2 weeks. And this just draws out the acidity and neutralizes it. But for more like deep penetrating cases, what you can do is treat it with a chemical called benzotriazole, which is what the professionals use in a lot of Europe. But you got to wear a mask and gloves because it's suspected of being a carcinogen. And as far as just overall finishes, if you have an even patina, you don't really have to coat it. But what you can use is Renaissance wax, which is British Museum approved, so long time mainstay. Or this other thing I've recently got is this acrylic lacquer called Paraloid B72. And you melt it down in acetone and apply it with a brush. And then you have this hard finish, which is a full hermetic seal, seals it off from the elements. And you just don't have to worry about it, period. And so I've just been using that a lot because it's easy and doesn't hurt anything.
So one thing I was wanting to say is, yeah, I'm glad you cleared that up a little
Quite
bit.
frankly,
I think when you and I
yeah,
both started to, have our friendship, that we one of the big things I discussed was I saw so many artifacts
yeah.
that I had the same question everyone else was having. It's like, how did you get these artifacts that you physically have? And I'm glad you
Well,
discussed
there's
the whole situation.
I bought them from a few fellow collectors. There are a few antiquity dealers in the UK, like Silbury Coins is a good one, and but there are a few good sellers on eBay and Etsy, but you've got to be really careful on there because there's a lot of people selling fakes, and a lot of the fakes aren't really good. But what was really funny is there were some people in Morocco selling what was clearly Tuareg jewelry that just barely resembles Thor's hammer, and they were selling it as authentic Viking Age Mjolnirs, and people were buying them, spending hundreds or thousands of dollars on them. I saw someone posting on Reddit like, "Oh, look what I got! I have connections." It's like you just got ripped off. But I know one reason that the Swedish History Museum, well, one way that they tried to justify their heinous crime is they said, oh, we don't want to feed into an illegal market. Newsflash, there is an antiquity trade and there is a legal and ethical way to do it. Well, ethical is debatable. I've met some people who feel very strongly about this, but it's out there whether you like it or not. And what I'm also trying to do is just by making these records, one of the biggest arguments I hear against being a private collector is sometimes what happens is, someone will get old and die without cataloging it properly, and then whoever inherits it has no idea what they have. So I'm taking as many of these things as I can and making these records, and I'm very strict about, like, if I go for a hike and get mauled by a bear, about like who's going to get these things.
Absolutely. And I will say that, like, one of the things I appreciated is your just preservation of it. And I would say I appreciate museums that are done being held properly. I mean, as much as we can, for how much they are
Thanks.
for. It's one of the things, like, so when I went to Norway, for instance, and I saw the Viking Museum, quote quote, Viking Museum in Oslo. When I was there for Midgårdsblot, or like just the different museums I went to in Germany or around Rome or in France. Went to all the most pagan sites. Some of them were very old Christian sites, which we could go a whole different topic on another day about the amount of paganism and symbolism within these Christian sites. But the fact is that just walking in and seeing that ancient, versions of our faith, the connection there, not only just on
Yeah,
display,
I've
but
seen some
on display
pics.
there, it's something that it speaks to you. Just seeing it there, seeing runes written in something, seeing a Mjolnir, seeing a sword, seeing a bracket, seeing something like those things just speak to you volumes. And especially if you're already in a spiritual mindset when you've approached them, seeing the artifact kind of puts the physical in the spiritual, and it really helps not just open your eyes, but I would say it helps you evolve spiritually as well. So one of the things I wanted to ask you is about one thing I really appreciate was like your way of viewing um, the artifacts. Okay, the question, I think we had a little bit of technical difficulties,
Yeah.
this being our first time doing this. But one of the questions I left off asking, well, we're not asking, but just mentioning, was that I appreciated your way of analyzing and presenting these artifacts. Often, archaeologists or academics will look at an artifact and they'll talk about where it came from, etc. And you do that too, but you also talk about how it's obviously a depiction of Odin or of ex Aesir Vanir or of some cultic item, something that you can actually tie the spirituality to. And I really appreciate your view of that, because that ties into just general, like I said before, of like seeing the physical item and the spirituality behind that.
Yeah, for sure. Like, for example, one common motif in early Anglo-Saxon art that I feel is often overlooked is you see it on a lot of cruciform brooches, often on like the foot plate, sometimes on the head plate, where you have uh, an anthropomorphic mask, or at least usually the upper half, like the eyes and nose, and then a mustache or a beard that morphs into two bird heads. And with several examples I've seen, one eye is somehow obscured, like it's smaller, or it's just kind of like not as defined, like it could be an empty socket or scar tissue. And I think, frankly, this could be an image of Woden that our ancestors could just very easily just carry upon themselves on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and I think recently you posted two or three of them were like that, where
Yeah, back
there
in the
were
summer.
there are basic artifacts that some people may have seen before, but the fact is that you point out that, hey, the eye in here is maybe it's not so obvious that it's not gouged out, but the depression isn't there, or the way of depicting it isn't as dark, and how it was doing it is
Yeah,
obviously an Odinic a motif.
yeah. Like I have this one from the Isle of Wight, which you've probably seen. It's made of a beautiful high tin bronze, so it's a bit silvery, and it's a little more minimalistic, so it just kind of stands out more. But one eye is clearly kind of just not very defined. It's
Yeah.
just the features are a bit more soft, like it could be scar tissue.
So going with this topic, I'll segue into just a question, interview question of sorts. What is your favorite? If you had to choose like the favorite artifact that you either have on you or that you have seen that really calls to you, what would your favorite artifact be?
Easy. It's a bronze Viking Age strap end. It was found in Linton, Lincolnshire, and it's got a very clear depiction of Odin with his wolves. So, a very popular style back then was just this plain strap end with three bore style animal masks. But this one has two facing each other, and at the top of it, it has an anthropomorphic face with a clear mustache and like the remains of like some what could be hair. And the right eye has clearly been damaged in antiquity with a sharp object. And I've seen a lot of very clear depictions of Odin with his ravens, but with his wolves, those seem a bit less common. And this thing, it's really funny because, like the FLO, that's Finds Liaison Officer, the British Museum's officials who record metal detecting finds, clearly passed over it, thought, oh, it's just another Anglo Saxon or Anglo Scandinavian strap end. And it was auctioned. Nobody matched me. I bought it for £100. And yet this thing, and also it doesn't qualify as treasure in the UK because it's not a certain percentage of precious metal. But this is, I have a few things that I think could depict Odin. This one, there's no question. This is an image of Odin. And I tell you, when I got it in the mail and I opened that box and I saw it for the first time, I could have sworn my heart stopped for a few seconds. It was like it looked at me. And these things, like they add a bit of like, kind of like a physical aspect to our religion. Kind of like how, some churches claim to have like a piece of the true cross or a piece of Christ's shroud. Like this is like that, but for us.
And
And
yeah, I agree with that. So there was one thing that, because like while I was touring different Buddhist temples, right? Uh,
yeah,
they tend to build, of course, they build stupas around what they think were artifacts from Shakyamuni Buddha,
yeah,
and I was just at one in Japan in Osaka, and they had the stupa was built around, and even the core of the stupa was almost like a staff itself, is a core that went up inside the pagoda that went all up, and that stupa was built inside around what they said was a sliver of wood from Gautama Buddha or Shakyamuni Buddha's staff. And
wow,
the same thing, even if it wasn't the case, right? At least say, just like some of the, I've seen some Christian artifacts where they're like this, because I did that while I was in Italy. I went to a few churches just to see, heritage in general of just of Europe. But I would see where they'd be like, oh, this is a segment of the cross, or this is,
yeah,
has blood from Christ or something like that. But those things alone give the physical manifestation to the spiritual, and it brings you just that much of a realism, right? And
yeah,
so I agree with what you're saying with like some of these Germanic, Anglo-Saxon, even the Celtic sites and artifacts. It just knowing that physical thing exists, not only that it depicts the gods, but that someone in the past of either your ancestors or just in general believed the same as you believe from that god
yeah.
and
The
that
sense,
depiction.
the sense that I get, like when I look at and hold this particular artifact, is it was made by someone who truly loved Odin and made this image as a compliment, pretty much.
And I think I'll try to just be an open post editing or something, either unless we use an image of, because I think you've shown me, definitely shown me an image before. We talked about
Oh yeah,
making some for some of our mutual friends. We'll either use that image as to represent you on the video format, or
you
I'll at
can't
least
think of a
link
better
I'll at
one.
least link to the image just so that we can see it.
Yeah, I
I'll
would eventually like to get the equipment to do lost wax casting, and that's another thing. Having these physical things would allow me to really precisely recreate some of them. And even though this one was a belt end, well, I don't know, maybe you want a belt with this. I could make pendants or like altar pieces with these designs.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And that's another way to reconstruct and bring back our history, because the future is the past kind of idea, and bring back
yeah.
future paganism with a past connection there.
So here's what I was thinking with this particular strap end. So kind of like there's this one processionary cross in Ireland called the Cross of Crom, which it's made of gold, silver, and jewels, but in the middle of it, it had just an open reliquary. The original relic has been lost, but what we could do is something similar and have like a large god pole of Odin, but have a reliquary and put this or other original depictions of Odin in them and have that in just a future temple where people can see it and also just really use it as just part of their worship.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, most of the Catholic, I would say, temples or cathedrals that I went to in Europe, where I was touring different areas in Europe and I was living in Europe, um, they would have, not all of them, but the bigger churches would have like a reliquary on the side where you could come. offer prayer or whatever and see these relics. Sometimes you do have a full saint's body somewhere. And then, and specifically in Asia, when I've been in Japan and India and stuff, they have the same kind of idea, where these are relics. And even if some of these relics are not true relics, there's some idea. It's just that they're there in this reliquary. But with ours, they would be actual archaeological items that we also have exhumed and preserved, versus just claiming that it's a sliver of a staff or something from ancient times.
Yeah.
So
What's really kind of interesting.
uh-huh.
So yeah, I know that like part of your spiritual awakening was learning about Shugendo and Japanese Buddhism. I remember back in would have been in high school at the time. One of the things that really resonated me resonated with me was when I started reading about Shinto. It just made sense, but ultimately, continuing down that path, I ended up becoming Germanic pagan.
And that's actually something I plan on doing a whole episode on, because recently I've seen some detractors and even just non-detractors, people have questioning like why do people go towards Vajrayana Buddhism or Hindu,
Yeah.
quote quote, if Hindu is not a good
So
word, but Hinduism versus Shintoism. And I have a whole thing pointing out the connections that Shintoism has, and also the influences that Shintoism received.
now,
But
my personal belief, well, when it comes to Germanic paganism, because as you've seen, there's been a lot of infighting over, yeah, a lot of people throwing around the term syncretism, and a lot of them don't even know what it means. Um,
affirmative, yeah.
yeah, I I personally, like, I'm a practicing Germanic pagan, but I have done a deep dive into Shaivism, and I've made a few great friends, and of course, I've still met a few people who are still mad about the British Raj. And one of my main takeaways is, so first of all, do I believe that you can reconstruct Germanic paganism and have something coherent that you can practice just from using the Germanic sources? Short answer is yes, but I think it's going to be a lot harder if you don't have a bit of extra insight from other Indo-European religious traditions, and that includes, whether that's Hinduism and Buddhism that are alive today, but also like the writings of Cicero and some of the old Roman orators. Well, Tacitus too, I know.
The Tacitus, of course.
A controversial figure. But what's really kind of ironic is a lot of the infighting over syncretism that we're seeing today. I actually think I might have inadvertently started it by sharing a Cicero quote. Cicero as in the Roman orator who wrote about his living tradition when he was alive in the first century, right?
Yeah, and do you remember what that quote is verbatim, or I'm going to summarize it and see what
yeah.
that.
Well, the summary of it was here. I might be able to find it, but the summary of it was he was saying that humans, we have the same name wherever we go, but the gods are known to multiple other cultures and are just called by different names in their respective languages.
And so that's a pretty good segue to what we were discussing. I want to iterate also on that, which I've clarified a lot. A lot of people keep using this syncretic, this attack on whatever syncretic. I've made a bunch of different videos regarding it.
All right, I got the quote.
Okay, you got the quote?
Yeah, translation. Come now, do we really think that the gods are everywhere called by the same names by which they are addressed by us? But the gods have as many names as there are languages among humans. For it is not with the gods as with you. You are Veleus wherever you go, but Vulcan is not Vulcan in Italy and in Africa and in Spain. That's from On the Nature of the Gods.
That's a really good quote.
What I found really interesting about that book too is, so the book it's a debate between four different people, and they all have sort of common goals that they're working towards, but there are things that even then they don't all agree on. It seems like there just really never has been a uniform consensus of like this is it, period.
Actually, I would, yeah, that kind of helps me segue into my what I was saying next is that people are using the syncretic as a derogatory. Of course, I take a little bit that a little bit directly personal in some ways because, of course, my book is entitled Syncretic Indo-European,
Yeah.
but it's also just more of the idea is that I don't think people are understanding syncretic properly, which I've mentioned multiple times. When I synchronize anything, I'm not even though I do see connections to things that are not Indo-European or not Eurasian. I'm only taking the aspects that are Indo-European and connecting those, and
Yeah.
those are a common heritage. Now, that's not saying that we don't have old Europe forms in. For instance, in Europe we have the older Europe and uh, paganism that was there and animism that was there, or in Eurasia they had the older Syncretism, or in Japan they had the Kamui cult before Shintoism was coming there, before Buddhism came there. But there are core aspects within those, and looking at those, you can see that these core gods and everything had, like you said, different names for the same gods. And I think limiting the gods to, oh well, I think you're this great, awesome, thundering deity who does all this stuff, but you only control my little aspect of the world, and you only affect my little understanding of the world, is literally telling that god, telling whatever god you're spoken to, Thor or Pagan, whichever, you're telling them that you're limited because I say you're limited, because
Yes.
I only restrict you to my interpretation, to my direct tribe.
Yeah.
and
Like
and that's, to me, that's
so
ridiculous.
so like you got to think about when the Indo-European peoples migrated. Do people think that when they went to new lands and formed their new languages, that they just abandoned their old pantheon and adopted or made up a new one?
Exactly.
It
And
seems
so,
kind
and
of
it seems not only unlikely, but it's also the fact that we know how that's not how it works, even in just anthropology, right?
yeah,
When they meet, if they didn't conquer the people, which that's neither here nor there, whether people think they conquered or they merged or interbred with people, the result, unless they stamped those people out completely and acted like Abrahamics, destroying all the religion, the result was never that. The result was always a sort of blended version of Indo-European faith with either Old Europe, Dravidian, you know,
yeah,
Elam for Persia, Tingrism for upper the Bon religion with Tibetan, that kind of idea. And most Indo-European faiths have always presented that stability where the structure is Indo-European, but the lay religion
yeah.
still contains that local people stuff, of which they sort of welcome in but control at the same time. And
Well,
that's across Eurasia.
yeah. And one example I bring up a lot is the goddess Nehelenia, which I'm sure you've heard of. But we have Roman style shrines in Britain and around the North Sea, and there's considerable evidence that the Celts and Germanic tribes, and possibly even the Romans, worshipped this deity who, what we can tell from our limited information we have left on her, was kind of patron or guardian of just the North Sea and just anyone who wanted to cross from Frisia to England or anywhere in that sort of vicinity. And maybe there was less syncretism with like the Germanic tribes because they largely kept to themselves until the Romans came and kicked their front door in. But the Romans definitely, like, if people think there was no syncretism in the ancient world, they're deluding themselves because
And,
you see
and
with
for
like
people and for people who want to say that Roman synchronism was just a way to manipulate, which I know that's two schools of thought, where the Romans were either actual synchronistic, or two, they were just doing it as a way to manipulate people into becoming Roman citizens or being under the state of Rome.
yeah,
You don't do so complete. I mean, even if you're doing so, you don't do so and leave the religion intact. Like, just
yeah,
because you put up a thing of Caesar and say, hey, you're going to also worship Caesar. At no point, well, except for a few examples we have, in general, they didn't topple over the whole religious structure of a place and all of the identity of a place when they did so.
Yeah.
So
And
in general, the syncretism that you were seeing there wasn't usually in that kind of understanding of spreading just religion.
yeah. And what I found really interesting is, in just reading about Rome and Greece. So obviously there was Serapis, who was kind of a syncretized overall Skyfather type figure, who kind of fizzled out. But
Probably was
what I found
absorbed
really
into
interesting
Jesus.
was among both the Greeks and also the Romans in Italy and Africa is especially in North Africa is Anubis, or the just fused image of Hermes Anubis, remained quite popular with Romans who were still worshipping the Roman pantheon.
And that's a thing also. It's like, for instance, Mithras, right?
Yeah,
Um, the Mithraic religion was rather large in most of Europe, right? Pre the Christian, most likely some, of course there's different schools of thought of whether Christianity took the Mithraic structure and just absorbed it or emulated it to spread. But one,
yeah,
Mithraism was already syncretic in itself. Two, the Mithraic order had a direct ties with the cult of Isis often, and the cult of Isis was the most
really.
popular religion in Rome for a while. So you see these ties together. I mean, the temples were either like down from each other kind of thing. Specifically, when I was in Capua, Italy, the all the Mithraic temple that they had there, the Mithraeum that they recreated. Not only is there one that I physically visited, went to for prayers, but they also had a reconstructed one inside the museum where you could go in and it was animated and everything. But they showed that the artifacts nearby, and from a temple that was known to have relations with them, or at least discuss and trade, was a cult of Isis. Um, and
Yeah,
in general, like you see, yes, Christianity did synchronize in some ways with the early Germanic places, because any place that had, Our Lady whatever or Frau whatever was probably a earth goddess, or a understanding of either Nerthus or Frigga or Freya or something like that.
so what's really interesting is, so what a lot of people don't realize is, so one of the reasons I think Germanic paganism wasn't really syncretic, aside from places where it shared borders with Rome, is a lot of Germanic pagans were very henotheistic. You would worship a deity aside from certain holidays, like on Yule everybody worships Odin. But the reason the Anglo-Saxon pantheon is quote unquote smaller is likely just because the island of Britain was smaller, and we know that the Utes favored Frigg. Like Free Folk England, the original name comes from Fria's folk, because Fria is the old English name. And we know that Thunor was particularly just popular with the Saxons in the south of England, but the further north you go, the more place names you have starting with, Wed, which is shortening of Woden. So it would look like basically that there might have been 3 or 4 major regional cults in England, with a few
It,
minor deities, of course.
but see, that's general in all forms of paganism, and that's what
Yeah,
I think people don't realize is that just because you were like you're one, as I've said before, Thor was like the most common
yeah,
worshipped, because he divine sun striker, has the thunderous qualities, the protector. He's
yeah,
the most common worshipped by all the people, regardless where you go. It's either Thor or Perun or Indra. They're all the most common worshipped
yeah.
for the people.
Well,
Heracles. But the one thing I would say with it is that just because you have this cult who raises up Thor on the highest and worships Thor on a daily basis with their daily rituals, does not mean that you're denying the other gods or their divinity or their place in the world.
yeah, that's where henotheism differentiates from monotheism. And a lot of people, like if you read any saga involving Odin, it's very understandable why most people just didn't want to deal with them, because the path of Odin is undeniably one where possibly you'll be able to achieve higher things, but this path will demand much more of you. You know, you want help getting through, say, this one battle, pray to Tyr or Thor. But if you want to become king or reach the status of like some of the legendary heroes who inspired generation after generation of our folk, and you were willing to lay absolutely everything on the line to get there, that's when you might approach Odin.
And so, yeah, I would say in that case, not to sound Christian in the aspect, but also, I see a specific hierarchy and layout that you have within, Indo-European stuff that's been, um, I would say, reflected within Christianity or taken upon in Christianity. And in the same way where you would go, where, a Christian is going to go to the Son or Christ, or they're going to go to God, um, why would you approach the Father, the Sky Father, the All Father first for something when you're not going to skip rank, is what I would say. You're not going to jump to the highest always and think you're worthy of talking to them when you haven't even bothered uh, worshiping or speaking with or praising, or a
Yeah,
Thor, or a different, or like you said, Tyr, or just a different god that's, or even your folks. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
And another thing that you'll notice in a lot of the sagas is Thor and Frey, you might say, are more responsive. Like there's a lot more accounts of someone praying to one of these more minor deities and being helped in a very short order, as opposed to people who dedicate their entire lives to the path of Odin. Well,
I
unless
would
you think about the saga of the Jomsvikings, but that's yeah, that's a very obscure and very interesting saga.
I would say that that kind of plays into what I was saying a minute ago with how you would approach
Yeah.
who he's going to respond to. Actually, interesting you mentioned sagas. I did have a few other things for us to talk to, but we'll just go ahead and segue into discussion. Have a light discussion on the prose edda. I'll sort of do an introduction of kind of my approach on the prose edda.
All right.
But
Do it.
go ahead.
I said, let's do it.
Okay, so one thing is, as I have come to two conclusions recently, and I'm going to make of course, a post about it at some point as well. But basically, I have two things that I've come to the conclusion of recently, which is that I think the breadths of the sagas. Now, I think there's a lot of, I think there's, of course, there's a lot of sagas. There's more written in the sagas and the and different tales. And even if you want to go even further, you have to Nibelunglide, or which is not really a saga, but is based off of the Volsung saga, or
Yeah.
even if you want to introduce other concepts. But if you want to take all these sagas and you want to put them all together, there's more work there than there is in of course, the Bible, right? But I
Yeah.
think that if you were to, I think when people look to the Rig Veda, for instance, I've read the Rig Veda. I've read not the whole Upanishads, but a lot of the important Upanishads. I've read the Bhagavad Gita and stuff. But I think when sometimes pagans are looking towards that, it's because they have a direct. Here's what you need to read. Here's what it says. Here's the interpretations. And I think that there is actually enough in the sagas, in the uh, poetic edda, in the prose edda, in the writings of Saxo Grammatica Succession, that that I think that you could put together something that would be just as impactful and understandable as this path, the Vedic path that we see. Of course, it's my personal opinion that it would reflect some of it, but that's neither here nor there. But I kind of wanted to mention upon that as well. But also recently talking about the prose edda, lot of times people talk about the euhemerism
Oh yeah.
of the prose edda. I've written at length about the euhemerism of the prose edda, how a lot of people throw it out saying it's Christian. They throw out basically the baby with the bathwater, saying it's too influenced. Snorri is too influenced. The concepts are too Christian laden. But the thing is that it kind of hurts Christians and pagans if you try to take it for that aspect, because if you actually read what it has to say, I mean, I would say I know it's an argument for those who aren't in the Odin is the Sky Father, but it definitely depicts him as the All Father, the Creator God, the highest God, the Sky Father,
Yeah.
the one that you can worship as King as well, the founder of all the gods. Like it doesn't hesitate at that. But I think that, and I think maybe you could speak to as well, is that too often dismissed as a book for pagans and for heathens and Asatru or whatever you want to say, Asatru or whatever in general. I think that if you took the prose edda and actually know how to decipher it and know how to reverse kind of some of the euhemerism out of it, that it's actually very solid understanding of what we come to understand for the gods and for methods of interpreting the gods. So what say you?
Yeah, you got to remember a few things with the prose edda. One is Snorri Sturluson. He lived in a time when as little as gathering medicinal herbs and making herbal medicines could get you charged with witchcraft. And I know under Charlemagne's law, the punishment was impalement on a stake. So he had to find a way to record these things safely, because even though Iceland was a bit removed from the chaos in the rest of Europe at the time, like he was still playing it safe. Like he was a politician, and he was one of the ones who was saying, we want independence for Iceland, and that's probably why he ended up being assassinated. And the other thing to remember is he was a politician and also a poet. And what he was trying to do, especially with the Skald Skaparmal, is save Old Norse alliterative verse poetry. And I personally think the Skald Skaparmal is particularly valuable because there are fragments of poetry from, well, poets that we know lived in like the 10th century and were, like, for example, Olaf Tryggvason's court skalds. And yeah, there are a few Christianized verses in the Skald Skaparmal, but I get the sense that what he was trying to do there is, because he was seeing a lot of these forms of poetry disappear along with paganism because they were used for drapas and praising gods, and we were seeing like ecclesiastical Latin and just biblical hymns coming in. I think what he was trying to do is kind of try to save the poetic form by like creating a kind of Christian alliterative verse, but obviously it didn't last. But for example, here I have this one. It's called a Lausa Visa, which is a single stanza poem. This was written by a poet who lived in the 10th century, Veiterliði Sumarliðason. Legi bráðst þú leiknar landir Þrivalda, steiptir starkaði stetu of Gjeldáða. Translation by Anthony Fawkes is, you broke Laken's bones, you pounded Thrivaldi, you cast down Starkad, you stood over dead Gjalp. And obviously this is a poem of praise to Thor. And I can't help but wonder if like the short Lausa Visas might have been recited a certain number of times, kind of like a mantra. But either way, the Skald Skaparmal is basically a textbook for authentic prayer and writing alliterative verse poetry and drapas and poems and songs of praise.
And really, if you look at it, the Rig Veda, of course, is all in hymnal prayer form. Has a meter, and a meter is supposed to be sung in a meter. In the same way as kind of how you read that and sung that. In some ways, you could take it as training of your reading this in this way, and memorizing this in this way, and it's like an oral passing down of like you said, a mantra or a method of singing it, a mandala of sorts. I think that's very important to understand.
Yeah. Well, with alliterative verse, with the placement of the syllables, and sometimes with like a visible gap between parts of it, it's very easy to see how this could have been recited or sung back in the day.
Absolutely, and yeah, and then of course another thing I was wanting to mention is we have the and Gylfaginning, which is to me one of the most important ones. I know the whole prose edda is rather large, but I feel like the prose edda starts off with the core aspects of
Well, it's more approachable than the Poetic Edda. Like
in
I'll
some
admit,
ways, yeah.
I love the Poetic Edda. I will defend its authenticity to my last breath, but it is a bit dense. Like the Prose Edda reads a lot more easily. So for someone who's new to paganism, like obviously I tell everyone read the Havamal. The Havamal is, in my opinion, one of the most important Eddic poems, and it has parallels around Europe in the 9th and 10th century. But overall, people might want to try reading the Prose Edda before they really get into the Poetic Edda, if they're not, academically or even poetically minded.
And then like one of the things I was like, what would point out here is like, so even like looking at here, right? So speaking about the All Father, Gangleri, because the question, who is the highest or the oldest of the gods? Hai replied, "He's called the All Father in our language, but in Asgard the Old, he has 12 names. One is All Father. He has Heron, Lord. I'll go with you have Thruster, you have Wise One, Fulfiller of Desire, the Resounding One, the Spear Shaker. You have Ruler of Weather. I mean, if people want to do whether the Sky Father or Zeus is the is Heracles. Well, I mean Zeus is Thor. Well, I mean the sun the son of the Sky Father always has a little bit of his attributes, but honestly, Odin is obviously has that thunderer and weather kind of storm
Storm
god
Rider.
approach to him as well.
Yeah, with the Wild Hunt. But you know what's really cool? Do you know what that title, Resounding One, is in Old Norse?
Is it Omi?
Omi. Yeah.
Which I mean, of course, at the risk of being syncretic or extreme to what people would disagree with, Om is Lord the resounding of the universe, the resounding
Exactly.
sound. So I think there's
I
connections.
think, yeah, I don't think it's too far fetched at all because I don't know if you've seen, but like Old Gothic shares entire words with Sanskrit,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Old Norse is just a few centuries removed from Old Gothic and Old Gutnish.
Of course, there's the Slavic languages, which Russian
Yeah.
they have very high cognitive with Old Sanskrit.
And
You know,
Latvian and Lithuanian too.
Oh, of course, those are even older Indo-European languages. But yeah, I would say Russian. Russia was a merger of Scandinavian peoples with the Slavic peoples in the region, and
Yeah.
so they have even more connection there. But just this stating, where he's asked, "Where is this God? What is he capable of doing? And what outstanding deeds has he done?" And he says, "He lives through all ages and governs all things in his realm. He decides all matters, great or small. He made the heavens and earth, and the skies and everything in them. Most important, he created man and gave him a spirit that will never die, even if the body." Was to burn to dust or burn to ashes. All men who are righteous uh, shall live and be with him in the place called Gimli or Vingolf. But evil men go to hell, and therefore and from there unto Nilfheim. So it doesn't say evil men only go to hell, like all people going to hell is evil.
Yeah.
It's saying evil men go to hell and then from there go to Nilfheim.
Yeah.
No, Nifhel is how they put it. So hell is a holding place, and then from there they go to Nifil, which is below in the ninth world. Uh, and so it's just a lot of things that they say here. So you see in the end when they're talking about him, the Odin Villian given life to mankind. They say, "It is my belief that this Odin and his brothers are the rulers of heaven and earth. We know we know that his name, and it is what we call the one whom we know to be the greatest and most renowned, and you too can easily call him that." It's just, to me, those things are explicit. I can understand people can try to connect these parallels to Christianity, but Christianity was a religion based off of, people say, Judaism. Judaism didn't even have a concept of hell properly, or even a concept of heaven.
Well,
The word heaven is an Indo-European. Yeah, and they had
because it was
yeah,
Gehenna in Hebrew.
Gehenna and Sheol, which were related to legitimate places where you dumped the actual dead or burnt the dead and dumped the bodies afterwards. Um, and most of the time there was no. They may have later on, this whole idea of returning to God was either a post-Persian idea that they received from Indo-European influences, or a post-Greek, post-Christian idea, which is what Judaism is actually really currently born from, that started to have, is where you get all the Kabbalistic ideas. All those Kabbalistic ideas came from a merger of Caucasus region converts and post-Christian Sephardic Jewish, in Spain. A lot of that includes Germanic concepts and other concepts that aren't found in the Bible or support in the Bible. But regardless, I don't want to talk about Hebraic stuff. But what I'm saying is that a lot of people who try to call the whole thing of the Prosetta Euhemerist haven't actually looked and compared it to the Eddas, the Avestan, the Greek texts, things like Hesiod's works, etc.
Honestly, the Euhemerism in the Gylfaginning is pretty minor. Like, he says a thing or two about the Aesir taking over, and then at the end he says, like, oh, but they're actually just the ghosts of Trojan warriors. It really feels like a lot of this, a lot of the contents of it are much older, and Snorri just tacked that on the beginning and the end so that he wouldn't be raked over hot coals. And
Yeah, it doesn't flow. It doesn't flow at all with the rest of the writing.
I think, he put that there so that he wouldn't be executed.
And
the man who wrote that Lausavisa I just read, he was killed because he wrote a few too many poems about a missionary who came to Iceland, and most of his work was destroyed except for that single Lausavisa, which is basically his legacy.
I mean,
it was a very turbulent time, and
kind of legacy to have.
He knew how to stay alive.
I mean, we still have his works, and people are still reading them.
Yeah,
I mean, people can hate on the man all they want, but the fact that we can read him.
And then the Heimskringla, even though like 2/3 of it is about Christian kings, there's detailed descriptions of pagan temples and practices that we can use. And I also encourage people to read it if they're like on the fence about paganism, because I know one thing that kind of kickstarted the pagan revival in the 1800s in Germany was people started reading the sagas and the Heimskringla again and learning the truth about how Christianity came to Europe. And I think that's also, like, I'm sure you've seen it too, but a lot of pagans are very quick to knee-jerk at anything that remotely resembles Christianity. And
I mean, that's the whole syncretic argument right now with some people is they don't understand monotheism, they don't understand monism, and they start flowing with all these Christian seeing, oh well, Christianity took from Platonism, and so therefore you're going to be a Christian because this reeks of Christianity. But in general, like these Christian mystics who are these Christian, I barely have read any Plato. I guess I've written about him in my books a little bit because some of his core things I have read do correlate to general Indo-European understandings. But there's a lot of what people attribute to, oh, the ex Christian, took from Plato. Ex Christian was probably a mystic Christian, and half those guys were called heretics.
Yeah.
So you can't say that this heretic Christian is the Christian that we're looking forward to, saying that this pagan is being too Christian. Oh, maybe he's not. Maybe that Christian was being too pagan. So I do want to segue with this into a, like a kind of a shotgun of a few things. One, speaking of syncretism, um, I think you found some correlations to Odin and Rudra in the Bhairava concept. I didn't
Oh
know
yeah.
if you wanted to have us. I know that's a personal faith thing. I know it is syncretic, but I don't know if you want to have a little bit of how that speaks to you, just a bit for those who might be interested.
Oh sure.
And then I have like two more topics, and we'll get close to
Okay.
wrapping up.
So I started my deep dive into Shaivism because certain sects, like Kashmiri Shaivism, haven't changed for thousands of years. And obviously, especially Vaishnavism has become more and more, well, it became more popular as it spread further south. And so it has less and less Indo-European influence. But certain forms of Shaivism originating in northern India are going to be extremely close to the religion of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. And especially like Puranic era Shaivism, you'll notice a lot of similarities, like even with just Eddic poems. Like that's one of my other big takeaways from my studies into Shaivism is a lot of people's like, oh, you can't trust that because Sayamandr Shrothi was a Christian, but there's a lot of parallels just between Puranic myths and Eddic poems. Like for example, one that you've seen me probably talk about before is the myth in the Shiva Purana with the Vulaspa, because in the Vulaspa we see the burning of Hathor, and we see Odin taking Mimir's head, and in the Shiva Purana we see a character Daksha who doesn't approve of Sati marrying Shiva, so he slights Shiva. He performs a ritual and invites every deity but Shiva, and Sati goes, and he humiliates her so badly that she immolates herself. And then Shiva appears in the form of Virabhadra, and Virabhadra ends up going and fighting with Vishnu, who, again, I've drawn quite a bit of flack with this. He ends up defeating Vishnu, who closely resembles Frey, so this closely resembles the Aesir-Vanir War, and ultimately lets Daksha live because he promises that he'll worship Shiva for the rest of his life. But where we see another connection with Mimir is later on we see, well, for the first time, we see the form of Shiva known as Kala Bhairava, just his most fearsome and frankly somewhat Odinic form, often depicted with a black dog, sometimes a wolf, and a noose in one hand, and he cuts the fifth head off of Brahma, because what he does in the Purana is Vishnu and Brahma are arguing over who's actually the highest, and so Shiva appears in the form of the cosmic pillar and tells both of them, he tells Brahma, try to find the top, and he tells Vishnu, try to find the bottom. Vishnu admits he can't find it, but Brahma, he at this point has a fifth head, which is ego, as we later learn. He lies and says, yeah, I found it. And so Kalabhairava rips that head off, which is, I think, with Brahma, very reminiscent of Odin taking and preserving Mimir's head. Obviously, it's not the same, but you can see, like, parallels and just common themes. And Puranas in this era, although Puranic Hinduism is a few centuries, like you can definitely see the parallels with Germanic paganism. And another big one is also where I see the resemblance with Vishnu and Frey is Vishnu's avatar Varaha, the boar, we see a similar theme with, because in the Eddas, Frey goes to fight Surtur at Ragnarok, and he dies, but afterwards he lifts, well, the earth rises from the sea again, and in the Puranas, this Rakshasa, Hiranyaksha, attempts to steal the earth and drag it into the cosmic sea, and Vishnu, as Varaha, lifts it out of the sea again. Like, that's a few examples. The Puranas aren't hard to find if you want to read them.
I
But
mean, yeah, and I would say it's a good point there. I know that one of the, in my opinion, one of the core aspects of Vedic faith in general, Rudra Shiva, is probably the number one connection that I would say that seems to be not only, is, I mean, people could say that Vishnu is also has a Sky Father aspect to him, the Great Supreme Lord aspect to him. But if you look at the Trinity, I would say, and the Trinity is not a Christian concept. If you look at the Trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, you can see that Shiva, Odin, Freya, I mean not Freya, Frey, Ingfrey, uh, and Vishnu, and then even instead of Brahma, you can see how Indra, who used to be the highest, and Thor match up. And so, what a lot of people will say, and you even have tapestries, and you have other illustrations in the Germanic, that the Germanic Trinity, as it were is Odin, Freyr, and Thor. You have sort of that same breakdown in not only in the Indic and just normal Vedic, also later on in the Buddhist, where the highest gods that are either made into bodhisattvas, worshipped as an aspect of a bodhisattva, or revered all the way up to near Buddhahood, or as the ones who guide one to Buddhahood, or the core yiddims, are things like that are associated with those three gods, including like I said, Bhairava, Yamantaka, or Vajra Bhairava. These are the same gods being accepted fully into Buddhism. And I will say, like my own work, of course, I talk about this a lot in my first book. But I also say that the book, the One-Eyed God, Odin and the Indo-Germanic Manabund, from Chris Kershaw. I know some people don't agree with him or his writings. I would say that he very much outlines this in a large book that really covers this extensively, how Odin and Shiva, Rudra Shiva, are basically, as he saw, one and the same god. He even connected other sky fathers. I'll also say that just comparative mythology by John Pavel, that's a great book in the same manner. So yes, these are academic books, and people, and I agree with some people about academics. Some people try to use all academics are the most comparative with comparative mythology, and are the most syncretic. But the thing is most practitioners who are really deep into a practice, especially in the most spiritual ways, and then have discussed with other deep practitioners from other faiths, non Abrahamic faiths, they tend to come to a conclusion that is very similar with a lot of the interpretations of the gods and the faith.
yeah, so here's another kind of interesting thing. I was talking with one of my Shiva friends. He lives in Kolkata, I believe, and we were just talking about just the revival of a pagan priesthood. And I was just describing like what a vulva, vitki, and gaudi are, and he was saying, like, tell me more about the gaudi, and I described, like, with all of our evidence from literature, like, this is what a gaudi was. These are the roles he'd be expected to carry out. Like, a gaudi wouldn't necessarily always be one who necessarily speaks to a deity and then relays the message, but would rather like provide religious teaching and counsel, and also would host various celebrations and also be responsible for the upkeep of a holy site or a temple. And he said basically, in my sect, you just described a guru.
And that's a very poignant way
Yeah.
of coming to that conclusion with it. And so, I mean, I guess I'll segue from that and saying, just in general, in a quick summary of what do you see as the threats and opportunities in modern paganism, how we can improve, and like the way forward for
Okay.
paganism.
So, threats and opportunities. There's, well, starting with an opportunity, what I see, at least where I live, is churches, especially the Catholic Church, are hemorrhaging Europeans because a lot of them have started basically just parroting the radical left, and like a lot of their talking points of, oh, you're responsible for like racism and slavery and residential schools and you have to atone for it, and people are just tired of being beaten on, so they're leaving. And the thing is, a lot of people that I've known, they go out into the world and they're looking for a community that'll build them up instead of tearing them down and constantly telling them how horrible they are. And I know one friend of mine found that community in the Orthodox Church, and some people in, well, especially in the UK these days, are finding that with Islam. But if we can kind of polish our image and start building real life kindreds and communities, perhaps we could present them with something that would resonate with them even more. But that kind of segues into another threat that I'm seeing a lot. Now, when it comes to threats, there's a lot of threats that have really kind of been beaten to death, like, universalists, woke pagans, like the Asatru community and the Troth and Nordic animism. But another one that I'm seeing a lot that seems kind of understated at least, is people coming into paganism with residual kind of trauma, I guess you could say, from Christianity, because chances are they wouldn't be leaving their churches if everything was peaches and cream. And I've known a lot of people who have had different reasons for leaving the church, like from just not agreeing with the theology. Like I even knew someone who was raised Christian, and he always struggled with like the concept of inherited sin, for example. And I've also known people who have left because, and I have permission to share this, by the way, like they came from a sect where women weren't treated very well. Like you were allowed to beat your wife, and she wasn't supposed to even speak without permission or go anywhere without an escort. So there's a lot of people coming to paganism, and their perception isn't really clear. And I think it's a lot of these people who knee jerk at anything that remotely resembles Christianity. Like, I've seen people argue that the belief that, say, one, our ancestors prayed, and B, the gods could actually answer these prayers and give tangible rewards to their followers is somehow tainted by Christianity. And I think this can kind of, if you're not careful, funnel you into certain schools, like the schools of, oh, the gods are just metaphors for natural forces, or they're just Jungian archetypes, and we'll get back to that, or they're placentas, or they were just deified ancestors, and Snorri Sturluson was being literal by saying they were Trojan warriors, and I've met someone who believes that, by the way. And so I think if people are coming into it with just this kind of view, it overall could be planting seeds right now that could end up growing and becoming a major problem in the future. So if you like came from a Christian family and like you were like abused or forced to go to church and stuff, like you need to confront your childhood trauma, work through that. Otherwise, it's going to forever cloud your perception.
Yeah, and not project it on
Yeah.
your faith that you're coming to.
And one thing that I think is important to keep in mind is when you read the primary sources, like the Heimskringla, for example, what you'll see was a really common conversion tactic is your king would show up at your village with his warband and take people hostage. Now, it's easy to say if you were at Verdun, you would have died. You would have chosen the axe over bending the knee. But if they had your wife, your mother, your son, that's a whole different dynamic. And what would you do? Well, what our ancestors did is they convert just enough to make their king happy so that he wouldn't start hacking pieces off the hostages, and at the same time try to incorporate as much of their own culture as possible. Like Ausavatni, the naming ritual became baptism, and Saint Olaf and Saint Michael took the place of Thor, and things like that. Like when you're looking at it with this lens, it can just really kind of help the pieces fall into place, I think. And I know that, like, learning the truth about how Christianity came to Europe, like the whole Verdun massacre and taking hostages and stuff, is part of what spurred the pagan revival in Germany in the 1800s. And who knows, maybe if we get these books into more hands of people who are kind of questioning their faith, it could have a similar effect today.
Yeah, and in some ways that's what my book was intended of, and all the other books I've read and recommend is just not only just to open the people's eyes, but let them see that pattern recognition. I'm not asking everyone to become syncretic or anything, because
Yeah.
that's a personal following. I mean, I 100% think that you can just that you can follow a Germanic path or a Celto-Germanic path or Slavic path, but I think that seeing these connections can help ground you further into what I. That's why my second book was about apologetics, because once you have that understanding of these are the different connections that exist in different not only theories and theology, but standards of understanding that are out there that can help you defend against the Christianity. So not only do you have answers for the improper Christianity you may be bringing into your Islam, etc., but you have those defense against when the Abrahamics or other people or atheists will attack you, and you put up that wall of defense, be like, hey, I actually know the answer to what you're saying. I actually understand creation, the afterlife, my daily life, the gods, my ancestors, my code of conduct and my morals, my virtues. And you have that ready to defend yourself, ready to defend your faith. Three takeaways I would like to kind of bring back what you're saying is, one is you were saying that the threats are not only people bringing their baggage. I 100% agree. People bringing their baggage from Christianity, knee-jerk religion, Christianity, either makes them do two things. They become this idea of paganism that they see. We've, like you discussed in the prayer, I've addressed the prayer multiple times.
Yeah.
Survivor Jive addressed it. Other people addressed it. Prayer is a thing that's thinking that people not. That's like you don't want to acknowledge any history even prior to Christianity if you think people didn't pray. That's kind of ridiculous. Those people,
Yeah.
I think, kind of have some kind of subversion to them, especially the people who think they, are equal to the gods. That's ridiculous. That also can go to, or the other thing where people are so tending to close themselves out, they can end up being atheistic with their answers.
Yeah.
I would say that nihilism is another thing I see in the West. That's just we got to avoid. I know we're all crass. I know, especially the current generation Z, Zoomer generation, just loves to, And I'm not of that generation, but I understand and deal with a lot of people of that
I'm
generation.
not
I'm
either.
just yeah, I
Thankfully.
know, but they definitely are very nihilistic, and so
Yeah.
sometimes they communicate with. Sometimes it gets even pagans. I have an issue where it gets too close to even these new Buddhist converts I see gets too close to blasphemy because they want to be edgy when they say something, so they say it in
Yeah.
a way, they communicate edgily, and now they've basically made a joke to convey a message, but they ended up being insulting to the divine, or they just made enemies where they didn't need to make enemies because they were they were trying to be edgy for that day. To me, I think all that's just uh, chaff and chatter that needs to be ignored. But I do think they do have a good thrive and love for actually wanting to find these answers. And I think also they need that positive buildup. And that's one
Yeah.
thing you were saying, is that Christianity used to offer that positive buildup in the church. And I think that they're finding things, be it, the golden one, be it workouts, be it, my post, be it other people's posts. When you present it, not just, you can present the dark side, you can present the negativity of what's going on in the world. But if you don't present them that positive buildup of how they can improve, even if they need to address their own problems, how they can improve and how the gods and their ancestors are there to help them improve, then that's, to me, that's the way forward. When you present them with that, they're going to gravitate towards
Yeah.
that, and
And
that's more of a natural life.
believe me, I understand. Like the situation we're in geopolitically with, you know, things like the governments in various countries and the global 1% and potential wars looming, it can be very hard to see the positive and just uplift yourself. But well, what I tell people is, well, in the pagan spheres, like best way to fight the black pill is one, practice every day. You know, whether that's prayer, whether that's performing a bloat, whether that's writing. Like I've tried like writing prayers and poetry. Nothing too good yet, but I guess you've seen some on my channel. And
Yeah.
also do everything or do something every day to prepare for if you think, like I do think that widespread social upheaval is coming. Do something every day to prepare, whether that's learning a new skill, whether that's hitting the gym, whether that's going for a hike or a run, or one thing I like to do is go for a swim, nice full body exercise. But don't sit idle. What's really interesting is some of the worst insults in the Old Norse language were ones that implied you sat idle. Like one was Elfhus Fifel, which it means fire hall fool. The implication is that you sit by the fire in the hall all day instead of doing something useful. Don't be an Elfhus Fifel.
Exactly. And I would say, regardless whether the level of looming impending doom you think is happening or not, preparation is always good. But
Yeah,
that preparation should be a positive in your daily life too. So, like, don't go being fearful while you're doing it. Do it in sort of defiance, but also in training that you get something out of it. So yeah, you can stock up on goods, but make it a blessed thing that you're stocking up on goods.
yeah,
Pray over the goods that you're stocking up. Yeah, ask for blessings with that. Go and work out on a regular basis. I mean, I don't care your fitness level. I'm not the most buff fitness guru there is. I'm not in the worst shape, but
well,
like,
you do
go out and
more
go.
than most people in our
I mean,
circles.
and that's the thing, is that, and some of these people are terminally online, and
Yeah,
that's the thing. Yes, being online for propaganda and for training and for teaching, great. That's why I'm online. But being terminally online, where all the thing you do is get online, circulate memes, tear others down, get angry about something, and or
yeah,
spread the darkness of what the pending doom, instead of going outside or going even in your own house and doing things like push-ups, sit-ups, uh, practice what you preach. Do a small bloat. It doesn't matter
yeah,
if it's a saucer, if it's a cup that you're pouring into, just a plain white cup you're pouring into on a picture that you photocopied or printed out, or of the gods on that you taped on your wall, and you're just doing that, and that's all you have. You're doing more by doing that and reading a little bit and praying a little bit more than 90% of everyone online.
yeah,
Actually practice that, and you will see something. It's your just because you don't see it the day you did it doesn't mean that the more repetition you don't see it. And what happens is that you're going to feel so much fruition of doing that, that the merit from doing that, that you're going to realize that it's better. Doing that is better, more spiritually and physically, especially when you combine it with the physical activity and just positive skill, like you said, skill learning.
yeah,
It's better for you than just being terminally online and angry all the time.
yeah.
It doesn't
One
mean you
thing,
ignore the news. It doesn't mean you ignore the news,
yeah,
but you should prepare for it. But don't let it creep into your soul.
yeah. One thing that I've always enjoyed, even before I was a pagan. So my other great love in life, other than history, has been nature. And I've learned a lot about wild edibles, mushrooms and plants, and foraging, as well as traditional medicine. And, if I go out for a hike or something, I might go off trail of it, do some foraging. I might look for whether it's some mushrooms or practice a new skill, like practice building a shelter. Or, so another thing, fun fact for you: in North America, almost every tree except for the red cedar has cambium inner bark, which is edible. I've tried harvesting some of that and eating it. It tastes kind of like brown sugar. And in Scandinavia, actually, during the medieval cold period, after the volcanic eruptions in Iceland made a lot of it made a lot of farms in northern Europe just have a hard time growing a lot of things like wheat that need a lot of sunlight. They would collect that cambium and grind it into kind of a flour, mix it with their remaining flour stores, and make cambium bread, which is actually very nutritious, a little bit harder to digest. But the point is, um, especially if you're learning something useful, like, say, I don't know, if you think maybe Kim Jong Un's going to come and invade us and we're going to have to be like Red Dawn living in the woods, you've learned something useful. Like, obviously, that's a very unlikely scenario, but should something like that ever happen, you will be glad that you've taken this time to learn this useful skill.
And I agree, and I will say that I think ultimately some of these people either going to us presenting that positivity, useful skills, and combining it with daily spirituality is what's important. Your spirituality should be something just woven into your daily being, and I think that these people who are going towards, like you said, orthodoxy, at least is still European and has some care for some of the, for European history,
Yeah,
especially like you said, people who are finding positivity or some kind of upliftingness in Islam, etc. What they're going to find is that ultimately both of those religions are not focused on Europeans. They're
yeah,
focused on either Abrahamic peoples, Hebraic peoples, Arabic peoples. And you know what? I personally think that, and to some degree, those are okay, and to some degree for those people. I think I don't agree with I don't agree with their creeping into other areas. I don't agree with their anti-pagan stances, but it is not. I don't think they are appropriate for Europeans or other Eurasians, really, in my opinion.
yeah.
And so I think ultimately they'll that'll come either crashing down, or feel like they'll know that they're lying to themselves, and even if they don't, even if they come to a positivity, and even if they maybe come to something where they can amicably get along with us, which ultimately their religions will tell them to attack us, as it were. Um, Regardless, I think that Europe itself and America and North America, um, some parts of Asia, even Japan, everybody needs sort of a way forward to uplift themselves. And I think that if your spirituality doesn't bring you some sort of hope, um, for the future, not just a nihilistic, or extreme eschatology, escapism, but a hope for your current living, regardless whether your afterlife is, but while you're working towards that afterlife. If you don't have a daily hope and a daily enjoyment in something in life that the divine has given you, that is all around you, then your religion's not worth it. And I think I'd like to present. That's what I like to present,
Agreed.
is that hope, that positivity, because that will go miles. I mean, the last topic I was wanting to discuss, which was going on the hope and meeting thing, which may sound uh, like the antithesis of what we're what we're discussing, because we're discussing going outside, preparing, living in nature. We could go talk on forever.
Oh
Was
yeah.
actually favorite media shows and games, etc. I think that's a big topic. I think we should make a whole nother topic, a whole nother interview time or podcast. Just come together. Maybe if we get some other guys on as well and discuss, shows, media, video games, etc. that we know are good, that we know have good values, that we know and then futures of that, because I know that you may have some plans for positive stuff in the future. But I think I would want to say with that, uh, just tell us right now what you would say if you had to give a recommendation for a TV show, movie, uh, or video game or music band. So we'll just go TV show. What would you recommend for those who are pagan or looking for a decent TV show?
Well, I'm I'm more of a horror freak when it comes to TV shows and stuff, but for pagan themed TV shows, let's see, what's a good one I've seen recently?
Did you watch Rome?
Oh yeah, so Rome I finished recently, and there are things I could nitpick, and like I know there are things that a few Roman pagan friends didn't like the way some characters are portrayed as like just the most despicable, manipulative people imaginable. But the set design is amazing. That includes a few shrines and temples, and historical accuracy is excellent. Like there are a few things I could nitpick, but overall, I'm gonna give Rome a hearty seal of approval. That
I was, g-
was it was enjoyable, and like the set and costuming was very historically accurate compared to like a lot of what we see today. Better than Barbarians for sure.
I know you're a big horror movie fan. It's actually interesting. This is a follow up. This interview is a follow up to my last episode that I did of the Draugr, where I discussed your movie and that you're one of your favorite movies and your suggestion. I discussed you a little bit in that with your recommendation of Draugr.
Broad.
Um, I, I, I think it's a good movie, especially for
Yeah.
horror fans who are looking for an alternate one that's themed appropriately.
Again, with this one, costuming excellent. You know, I don't see any IKEA rugs, biker BDSM gear, bad haircuts. I see what I would expect to see in 11th century Scandinavia. Like, I feel like a lot of negative reviews from that movie come from people who just don't understand the lore as much. But I definitely recommend Drog. It's if you're in North America, it's on Tubi for free. Another movie that I saw recently that I really liked, and I know you had mixed feelings about, was The Legend of Tommy Rees, that Scythian movie from Kazakhstan. And I know a very valid criticism a lot of people have about it is it made them appear a lot more Turkic, when we know the Masagete were described as being very pale, often with red hair, but it was filmed in Kazakhstan with Kazakh actors, so of course they leaned more into the Turkic angle. But once again, like the costuming, the armor, and weaponry, I thought was really well done, as well as like the part with Persia.
It's actually interesting as I've seen parts of the movie and I need to go back and watch it. Of course, that was the reason that kind of was my turn off with it. On the opposite
Oh,
hand,
can't
they have the Scythian or the last warrior, whatever it's called
Russia.
in Russia. But I think in Russia it's actually called the Scythian. In English they translated it like both ways, but I feel like that's more of a proper depiction of Scythian peoples. It had a little bit over the topness with
I'll have
some
to
of the
watch
crazy
it.
fantasy elements that it went.
Yeah, kind
But
of like Northman.
yeah, kind of like the Northmen. But I didn't feel like they were. I think they conveyed the message that they needed to convey.
Yeah.
So then we'll say, what video game would you recommend? And then yeah, go with
Well,
viewing.
one of my favorites of all time is Skyrim, but I've also always really been into like classic games, and especially the Legend of Zelda series. Well, A Link to the Past, I think, would probably be my favorite. But there's also, like with various Zelda games, definitely a few pagan elements, which
Oh
might
man,
kind of start to pill people left and right.
I actually considered doing a whole episode about that. Not only I know Zelda has a lot of overt Christian kind of European elements. That's because
Oh,
doesn't.
yeah,
Japan merges runes and the West and magic with Christianity with they all of the West becomes one like for fantasy one kind of theme of just they don't fully understand the differentiation between paganism and
yeah.
Christianity. But I will say that man, the not only just the European aspects of Zelda, it has some very hardcore Persian aspects, like Persian connections and Scythian connections. I could go on forever. I think that's probably a good topic on its own. If anyone, any listeners, want to let us know, and if you want us to elaborate on anything, not only just in this episode, but also, if you'd like to have an episode about Legend of Zelda, if you'd like to have an episode about any of these things we talk about, horror movies, other recommendations, let us know. I could have Malcolm back on, or even if he's not available, I can go forth on some more topics like this.
Yeah.
Zelda aside, give us one band you think is worth listening to, specifically with pagan themes, or something that you were listening to recently.
Well, recently, English pagan band that's kind of up and coming is Galdercraft. They're doing Anglo-Saxon pagan themed music, and like there's a lot of other good pagan artists out there I like Danheim, Elfric Avery, but right now I think Galdercraft, they're kind of up and coming. We should really kind of give them some love.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. I This is probably a good idea for another episode too. Just focus on music. I've always looking for new bands. You know me, we talked a lot, but I have a list of different pagan themed bands I listen to. I actually haven't listened to them, so probably I post this discussion for the podcast. You probably link me some songs so I can get caught up on them.
Will do.
That concludes our interview and this episode of the podcast. Do you want to have say any parting words, or just quick words of wisdom you'd like to impart before we cut off, Malcolm?
Well, thanks for having me. Always good talking with you. Let's see.
Absolutely.
Words of wisdom. Here, I'm just gonna open my Havamal and see just what page it lands on.
Oh, kind of like divination, like some people treat with the Bible, huh?
Okay.
What is that called? Doing that?
I don't know. All right. And my finger landed on 44.
Okay.
If a friend thou hast, whom thou fully wilt trust, and good from him wouldst get, thy thoughts with his mingle, and gifts shalt thou make, and fair to find him oft. I think
that's appropriate.
Where this also really kind of fits in today is just with just various just current events and just the way our society has been working is people, it seems, often just they forget to maintain the relationships that are important to them. And well, obviously with us not having as many kindreds and communities like you'd have with the church, it's just not something that just kind of you can take for granted. So until then, just make sure that you maintain these important connections in life, because otherwise you might put it off for a day, for a week, for a month, and then who knows.
I agree, and definitely this conversation alone has given us time to talk even further as friends, even though we've talked quite a bit. And I hope it inspires others to not only want to come on and talk with me, even if you don't fully agree with me, come on talk with me. We can share this, especially if you come in good faith as friends. But also just gives other people time to hear two practicing pagans discuss their faith and discuss in an actual back and forth manner, more than just passing memes and dialogue back and forth online.
Yeah,
so thank you very much. Yep.
One more thing. If any of your viewers have any questions for me, I'm totally down to come back anytime.
Absolutely. If I have a collection of questions, we can have a part 2 or 3 or 4, whatever we need. If they'd like to, and we can always readdress anything you have presented here. Thank you very much for your time. And then
we've both got various plans for the future, things we'd like to do.
Absolutely.
Podcast's a good start.
Okay. Thank you, and we'll talk to you all later. And thank you, everyone, for listening.